For quite some time, budget builds have been unreachable because of skyrocketing GPU prices and availability taking a dive in both the new and used market. Things have finally started to change, with graphics cards coming back in stock and prices beginning to improve across the board. Today, I'll be building one of the best performing PCs for less than $1,000 US. Hey there, I'm Danny, welcome to the channel. I just picked up this i5-12400F recently and B660 motherboard combo. The idea is to pair it with the cheapest 30 series card, the RTX 3050. This PC will be centered around 1080p gaming because that's still the primary resolution for gamers. According to the most recent Steam hardware survey, 67% of people still game on a 1080p monitor. Only about 10% game at 1440p. But that number is growing steadily every month. I also wanted this PC to be able to do everything well. That's why I chose the 12400F and not something like the 12100F. This thing should be able to game, stream, and even dabble in some light content creation. Let's take a closer look at all the parts I'll be using today. First component, which is the heart of the system, is the CPU. I chose the i5-12400F. This is LGA's 1700 socket, and it has 6 cores and 12 threads and boosts up to 4.4 gigahertz. That's a pretty powerful CPU for an i5, considering the high-end CPUs only boosted to 4 gigahertz back in 2016 or so. Now, the i5-12400F does have a CPU cooler included with it. However, Intel's stock coolers are horrible. Always have been, always will be. The CPU cooler I decided to go with is the Vetroo V5 CPU Cooler. This cooler is cheap, it looks good, and it has great performance. This CPU will go into the MSI B660M Mortar Wi-Fi DDR4 motherboard. Now, it uses DDR4 instead of the overpriced DDR5. It's got 2 M.2 slots, and it has all the USB ports I could want. Plus, it's got a built-in I/O shield. I do wish the motherboard was a little bit cheaper, but I understand the increase of cost, and they've added so many new features to B-series boards. For RAM, I'm using Corsair's Vengeance RGB Pro. This is 16 gigs, 2 8-gig sticks running at 3200 megahertz. This is pretty much the standard size and speed that you want to run for any kind of PC these days, but 32 gigabytes is becoming the norm just because of cost drops. The storage is the Samsung 980. There are cheaper SSDs, but I do recommend an M.2 SSD now because costs have dropped so much over the past 2 or 3 years. I picked this one up for just over $100 for a 1 terabyte model. The graphics card, as I said earlier, is going to be the EVGA RTX 3050 XE Black. I got this card on launch day at the $250 MSRP. If prices can get back to that, this is a great buy. It's got 2,560 CUDA cores, 1,777 megahertz boost clock, and 8 gigabytes of VRAM. That's the same specs as an RTX 2070 Super. To power this entire system, I'm using the EVGA Supernova 650G2. I'm only using this power supply because a friend of mine gave it to me, but you can get the Supernova GA 650 watt for $64.98. This gives you plenty of power and room to upgrade if you want. The case has been used tons on this channel. This is the Cooler Master Masterbox MB311L ARGB. It's the best offering in my opinion for a micro ATX case. I use this thing quite a bit in builds so far on the channel, and I did a full review on it that I'll also link below. Now that you know what parts we're using, let's start building this thing. Well, the build's all done. As you can see, it turned out great. I think it really looks good. It was extremely easy to build in, as it always is. That's why I chose this Cooler Master case. I really like it. I've used it so many times now. Even though it looks great, I'm sure you're wondering, how does it perform? Well, let's talk about that. I tried out 4 different games, 1080p on max quality presets using a 3-run average. First game up was Forza Horizon 5. This little system achieved 52.8 FPS average and 45.1 for the 1% low. That's not really great, but I'll be honest, I didn't notice a difference between 60 FPS and the 52 FPS I achieved. It felt like a 60 FPS experience. Things improved greatly when I played Apex Legends. I achieved 121.7 FPS average and 89 for the 1% low. I think that's great because you can bump your settings back, as I said, and you can achieve 144 FPS for a shooter game like Apex. Next game was Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I achieved 90.3 FPS average and 65.7 for the 1% low. This is another high graphics game, not really a fast-paced, high FPS requirement game. So the 3050 achieving 90 is just fine. Last game I tried was Control. I got 52.1 FPS average and 42.5 for the 1% low. Just like Forza, we're kind of getting in the lower FPS range there. You can see the 3050 kind of struggles a little bit in that instance. So one thing I was curious about, the 3050 has DLSS support. This is an RTX card, so it's got ray tracing and it has DLSS. I decided to enable DLSS with the 3050 for Control just to see what the improvement would be, and I was very surprised. Without DLSS, I had achieved 52.1 FPS average. Well, once I enabled DLSS, it got 78.8 FPS average, and the 1% low jumped up to 66.7. That's really good to get that much of a bump and increase in performance. Now, what DLSS does, for those of you that don't know, is it renders the game in a lower quality resolution. So in Control's instance, it renders it at 720p and then it upscales it to 1080p. So you're still seeing a 1080p image, but the game is actually playing it on the computer at 720p. So if you can get an increase in performance to a playable over 60 FPS experience, but you're still getting it on this card with these specs, that's a pretty good deal if you ask me. I also did some temperature testing to see how well the case handles these components. Now, I obviously put the side glass panel on. I have it off just for video purposes because I didn't want to glare, but look at these results. First test that I ran was Cinebench R23. This stresses the CPU, all the cores 100%, so it puts a lot of heat on the motherboard there at the CPU. The CPU temperature didn't go over 63 degrees Celsius. That's with the Vetroo V5, mind you, not the stock Intel cooler. The Intel cooler, as I said, is kind of poor and it'll get a little bit higher temperatures than my V5 did. The second test I ran was Unigine Heaven. This puts a full stress on the GPU, not the CPU, and the highest temperature I achieved was 62 Celsius. Pretty good for a GPU that has such a small cooler on it. And the last thing I did was gaming temperature testing. So I just observed the temperatures and recorded the results for across those 4 games that I played. In gaming, the CPU didn't go over 40 degrees Celsius and the GPU did not go over 60 degrees Celsius. I'm really happy with that. That is, 40 Celsius is almost idling if you ask me. And the GPU being under stress in all these games didn't get over 60 C, that's pretty good. Now, I didn't get any streaming B-roll or anything. I didn't actually record my gameplay while I was streaming, but I did hook it up and stream and game together with it. The FPS difference was so small that it was almost negligible. It was about 5 or 6 FPS difference in pretty much every game that I've decided to stream with. And that's because of NVIDIA's NV encoder that's built into the 3050. Yes, even the 3050 has the NV encoder. That's why I said this system can not only game, but it can stream and do some light content creation as well. The reason I put this PC together is it's not going to be outdated anytime soon. Yes, there's a lot of new releases coming out. The RTX 40 series is about to come out. The Ryzen 7000 series GPUs are about to come out. And there's new CPUs coming from both Intel and AMD at the end of the year. However, NVIDIA and AMD will not release their budget series cards that'll be replacing the 3050, like a 4050 or something like that, until next year. They always release their high-end stuff first because they want everybody to adopt that and pay those high premium prices. So expect 4080s, 4090s, the AMD 7900 XT, 7800 XT, that type of thing. Last thing I'll mention is the cost on this build. The total cost of the build came out to $967.91 USD. This is not counting the CPU cooler because the Intel stock cooler does come with the 12400F. You can use it. It will function without this Vetroo V5. I just wanted something that was more aesthetically pleasing and gave me a little bit better performance for my system. If you wanted to save a little bit more money, that way you could afford the V5 for yourself, you can drop back on some of these other components. Like the power supply does not need to be a 650 watt unit. It doesn't need to be 80 plus gold like mine. So you can save some money there. You could also get a smaller hard drive, a 500 gig. There are cheaper 1 terabyte NVMe drives, and you can cheap out on the RAM a little bit too. You don't have to get RGB RAM. You don't have to get Corsair. There's other brands that are much better priced than the one that I chose. All that matters to you is that you pick up the i5 12400F and the RTX 3050. You can choose a cheaper B660 motherboard than I did, and you'll get the exact same performance that I got in my testing. So what do you think of my little budget build that I designed here? Is there something that you would change for yourself? Let me know down in the comments. I love reading that stuff. But that's it for this video. As I always say, I'm Danny with Danny's Tech Channel, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, I'm watching the rise, and I wouldn't say I'm shocked, cause I'm hardly surprised. This one's for the ride, this one's for who knew I'd make it.